How's that? Good. All right. So, what I'm going to go over, I'm going to give a disclaimer first here. This is a review of a deployment. I went to Hurricane Irma. It was an EMAC request. First and foremost, it's pretty blunt, and I don't want to intentionally hurt anyone's feelings. If there's anybody else in here that was listening to this or anybody watches the recording that deployed there, keep in mind this is my opinion, my observations, and all of them are pretty much backed up by the 2017 hurricane season report that came out. That kind of, I think that was a big driver of the new tiered system and qualification systems and a lot of that because there were issues that were found down during that hurricane season at multiple places with the IMTs. So there was a lot of stuff that came out of that hurricane season, and I'll kind of blow through this. Hurricane Irma. This was, let's see, came around September 10th, 2017. It's hard to believe it was 7 years ago. As a Category 4, and it came straight across Cudjoe Key in the Florida Keys. The animation you're seeing there, one thing I want you to pay attention to, you see Irma going through, but look at the right corner of the screen. You will see that next hurricane coming. That's Hurricane Marie. We're going to discuss that here in just a little bit a minute and talk about the effects of it. But a little bit about the deployment or where we went to, and it was Monroe County. The map on the right there is Monroe County, which is essentially the Keys plus that great big old chunk of stuff to the bottom left or Florida there, which is nothing but Everglades. Everything we actually physically did had to do with the actual Keys itself, because I think there's like a population of like 17 people that live out in the Everglades, and it's all indigenous people, and that was not really part of our deployment because it's very sparse. It's almost no population out there. It's just alligators and snakes and nothing out that direction. This is what I was going to get at. When we deployed, we left on Monday or Sunday I think it was 17th or 18th. I got the dates will start popping in here. So when this map you see right now of Hurricane Marie coming behind Irma, when this projection cone was on the National Hurricane Center, we were deploying to head towards Florida. So we had no idea if we were going to get hit a second time by Marie. We were basically told, hey, look, you could get down there and have to re-evacuate. You could get down there and have to hunker down and get slammed a second time. We have no idea what's going to happen to you, but you need to go. So what ended up happening, we monitored it through that week. And as you remember through history, it basically hit Puerto Rico, wiped it out, and then turned to the north. So we were spared in the Keys and continued our work. But the first several days working in a situation unit, we had no idea what was going to happen to us as we were doing work down there. Backing up a little bit, Virginia has 4 IMTs. At that time, Southwest Virginia's IMT was brand new. The ones that have been around forever were the National Capital Region, which is actually a multi-state team. They have members from Virginia, Maryland, and DC. And so they're the big boys, quote unquote, I guess. You can look at it. They've been around for a long time. They're huge, close to 200 members, something like that, or maybe 200, more than 200 members, lots of assets. Central Virginia, which is down around Richmond, they're second newest to us, and then Hampton Roads is the second oldest to the capital region. Down on the coast, they've got a lot of military contingents down on the coast of Virginia with Norfolk and all that, and then also hurricane issues. So they have a very robust team as well. So we were brand new. The team had only existed for a little over a year at that point, maybe past our 0305 course. And the concept was to develop a blended team. So Virginia, instead of picking one of these 4 teams to send them on this deployment, this EMAC deployment, they basically picked a few people from each team to go as a blended team. So this was the first time Virginia had done this concept of a blended team. We met in Richmond on Monday morning, a little bit more than a week out after landfall. And I can tell you that it was almost like being back in high school or middle school or something. Like you got, 4 different circles of people. Of course, me by myself, I'm not really in a circle because I was by myself for my team, but the other teams are all kind of like in their little region, and everybody was mad. The guy I rode with was from the capital region. I rode with him in the vehicle down, and I mean, he immediately just started lighting in about how we were destroying team continuity and this was a terrible idea and on and on and on. And I'll skip to the short version. By the end of the deployment, we were a true team, and it was everybody was tight, everything was great, but it did not start out wonderful. Not everybody liked this concept, and not everybody liked this deployment initially. But again, by the end, everything was jiving. It worked very well. It was pretty awesome by the end of it. So what the EMAC request was for EOC support for Monroe County, the Keys, basically. That was what we were requested for. That's what we were to do. And by the way, I was at my previous job then. I was a lieutenant at the police department still, Roanoke City, and on the Southwest IMT. So mission was up to 14 days. So there were 2 days travel down, 2 days travel back, worked into that. So possibility of a total of 18 days. We ended up working 13 with the 4 travel days. And again, it was a true blended team. Travel down was an adventure. We had a convoy. That's all the vehicles we had in the convoy as we were traveling down. I know several of you, I'm speaking to the choir again here. Most of you have probably been on a major EMAC deployment, and you already know this, but I remind everybody, the travel down, the 2 days traveling is a mission in and of itself. We had issues. We had 2 flat tires in the vehicle I was in. We had vehicle issues coming back. That had to be planned out in detail, how to get in and out, because of the damage and stuff we were going to be driving through down in Miami, but that was its own adventure. These are some photos of what it looked like as we were coming in. Essentially, this was my first big deployment and first time in a hurricane aftermath area. As we were going in, getting closer to Miami, you started seeing little telltale signs of damage, some trees down, and then some of the highway signs down. And things just progressively got worse to where you started seeing the signs destroyed. And then the photo there, the jet ski, oh my God, there were boats and jet skis everywhere you can imagine, up in trees 20 feet in the air, piled around bridges, sides of the road. I can picture all of the advertisements for them were started last time I ran it, and slight water damage is probably what they had listed for after they had them for sale after that. But boats everywhere and debris everywhere. Debris was a huge issue. So we left Richmond 9 a.m. September 18th. They did a little dog and pony show in Richmond, which was a little bit annoying because it killed some of our travel time. But we got out, stopped in a hotel, I think in Upper Florida that night, and then did the rest of the travel on Tuesday. Got there in the afternoon, checked in at the base camp. We'll have some fun facts about the base camp on the next slide. But we did our vehicle inspections and logins and all that good stuff, and then actually reported to work the next morning. So the base camp at Marathon, they put it in the airport that's on Marathon Island. So within the airport perimeter. Part of this was for security purposes. Once they got the fence around the airport, fixed, we were kind of in a secure area where they had only a couple gates in and out to give us some security. Plus, it was one of the higher ground. I guess this was like 8 feet above sea level instead of the rest of the place that was like 5 feet above sea level. But it was fairly dry when we got there, fairly decent. You can see the photos there, looking pretty good inside the big tent there. You had your cots. It did have air conditioning. But it was a 24-hour operation, so very noisy, didn't get a lot of sleep. What I want you to pay attention to is the map on the bottom left, though. That is a screenshot I took from Google Maps when I was laying in my bunk inside of the tent at the airport. So if you know anything about airports, you can notice that there's a taxiway, and that's the main runway right there outside of our tent. And this airport went back in operation. So there was no fence, there was no wall, there's no barriers when we had first got there. They eventually put up a chain link fence between us and the aircraft, but the small aircraft would come down and do their run-ups right outside the tent, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. Small jets landing, small prop aircraft constantly. So lots of noise and lots of danger. Had any of those planes veered off or they had an incident, they was going to probably plow right into our tent. So there were good things and bad things about being at the airport. We can go into that later. But anyway, So our assignment, Emergency Operations Center, some photos of that place. It was packed. This is for the county, again, not the state. About 135 people, I think, assigned to the EOC when we first arrived. Lots of chaos, as you can see. It was a very busy place. I was assigned to the planning section, situation unit. So this was the first time also, you go through the O305 and you go to some of these other deployments, there's always, they talk about the BAM, there's always the big ass map in the background. And our team leader, he came to me early in this thing, and there was no BAM, by the way. There was no big one map that took care of everything. So he was like, you got to have a big map. You got a big map. And I just looked at him. I'm like, no, because I am the no guy. I will tell you no straight up without any hesitation. And he was kind of taken aback. And I'm like, you can't have one because the Keys are a chain of islands that are like, I don't know, 125 miles long. If you had a map that was 15 feet by 15 feet on a wall, each island would be like a little bit bigger than the size of a quarter. There's like no detail you can have. So it was the first time I'd ever been on a deployment where you had to have individual like maps for the islands and you had to just skip in between because we were surrounded by water. And it was very different, very, very different in how we did some of the mapping and stuff like that. It was not the usual kind of deployment. But you see a little bit of the maps and different products we produce. We were also doing a sit rep every day, updating a message board with the sit rep and the IEP for the day. That was literally just a wall in the EOC, which the EOC was their county administration building. So they just like picked a wall and they were like, all right, right here's good. And you just duct taped everything to the wall. And that's the way that went. So it's pretty simple and rudimentary. We were sending up sit reps to the state and FEMA level, day actually twice a day at first, and then to every day. 12-hour shifts when we got there. The next week, the second week we were there, the emergency manager and the county employees had to get back to work. So they changed things to an 8 to 5 schedule, but planning, we stayed on a 10-hour schedule and ops did whatever they needed to do. So scheduling kind of was dependent on what your assignment was while you were there. Not going to spend a lot of time on these. I can share these slides later, but it just kind of gives you an idea of the setup. I'll stop on the planning one, show you what, since we are planning and everything else is like secondary to planning. So we had a section chief and then a deputy section chief. So the way they kind of worked it, the way the county EM wanted it, he was in unified command, and his thing was he wanted a county employee in the main section chief roles with the IMT support, generally speaking, in the deputy roles. So we were kind of supporting the locality, so to speak. In the situation unit, for example, I've got listed there Cynthia Hall. She was actually an assistant county attorney, and he had kind of dubbed her the situation unit leader, and then I was the assistant situation unit leader. In reality, I was doing it because she was still doing a lot of legal work, which she should have been. She should have been on legal work from the beginning, but again, they were kind of mixing things up. But we did not have a whole lot of resource. This was a big response, and we probably should have had some more things filled out here, but we did the best we could with what we had, and still didn't have enough. There was a lot of needs there. So these next couple slides, a lot of this stuff came from it happened before we got there, and we sat down with the EM the last day. We had picked his brain, and I made a whole lot of notes on what he went through to kind of review how things went before we got there, all the way through our deployment, so that we could kind of understand the big picture. And of course, being my first big deployment, I was very I was nerding out on the notes and stuff because I wanted to preserve some of this stuff. So the first and foremost thing after the hurricane passed through, first thing they needed to do was push US 1 all the way down to Key West. So they needed it's an island chain. Bridges connect all the islands. They needed to make sure that artery was open or usable. So there were places, because literally a lot of these islands are 5-6 feet above sea level. The storm surge came in and pushed up to 6 feet of sand and debris on top of Route 1. So they had the military with loaders and graders and stuff pushing in front of them. They would push until they got to a bridge. They would send out engineers to inspect the bridges, make sure that they were structurally intact, they were good to go. Cross that bridge, go to the next island, and repeat all the way down to Key West until they could get to Key West. The other thing that you have through the Keys is every key has a designated helipad. These are for backup if the bridges are taken out, and they're located. Like, we were at a restaurant one night right near the end of our deployment, we finally got out one night to a restaurant, and there was one of these helipads there. It's not property of the restaurant. It's just it's like a public thing. I don't know if there's a partnership with that, but they have designated helipads at these islands so that if the bridges are out, they can land help in there. And then they got the airports at Marathon Island and then down on Key West. So they opened up the road all the way to Key West, established security, which was easy for them. So they had a best case scenario on access control because it is islands, a chain of islands, and US one's the only way in and the only way out. So they could put a roadblock on US one right at Miami, and they could control the whole Keys, everything in and out. So that made it really easy for them, as opposed to like places in Texas or anywhere else in Florida in the upper peninsula area that you can't do. It might be 50 ways in and out. They had one, so they had it to their advantage. Closed US one, and then what they did is after they pushed US one, is established a roadblock at every one of the side neighborhoods off US one, from Miami all the way to Key West. So right the day we were traveling down, they had opened it up back to the public, but the problem is you could go down US one. Actually, you could drive all the way to Key West. You could go to Key West and pull up at a couple of the bars. What's the one on Duval Street down there? I don't know if any of you have been there, but nice place. They got some famous bars and stuff. You could drive all the way to there and go to one of those bars and drink or whatever because they wanted tourists in there, but you couldn't turn off anywhere because if you tried to turn off in our neighborhood, there was a cop there. They stopped you, checked your ID, and if you didn't have an ID in that neighborhood, you couldn't go in that neighborhood. So US one was open, but you could only go into the neighborhoods if you lived there. They established their points of distribution, started chucking out, water and MREs. They had flown those in on C-17s as soon as they got the airstrips pushed open as well. Then they started working on electric and water stuff. All their water infrastructure was taken out, electric. Got some shelters opened, and communications wasn't until much later. And of course, search and rescue was going on. So this is the initial couple of days after landfall, what was going on. So going into it, day 3+, they had established curfews in the area, which worked very well. They had boil water notices because of the water stuff out. The damage assessment was beginning. They're trying to get out into the neighborhood, see who had stayed and who was still there, etc. They had the shelters open, but immediately the EM, when we got there, his biggest push was reduce the shelter populations. His thing was shelters basically become pretty much medieval pretty quickly, and he didn't want the citizens stuck in those conditions. So we did a lot of things, and I'll get into that in a minute to reduce that down. We had a lot of success. The bases were brought in. I'll get into that a little bit later. Fuel distribution points. So there was a separate one for citizens and responders because every gas station was pretty much destroyed. So citizens would go to one, show their ID, and they would just fill up their car. It was just tankers. They had tractor trailer tankers at a parking lot. And the first responder was the same way. You'd pull in a first responder vehicle that was registered into the incident, and they would just stick the nozzle on the side of your truck, fill it up, and you'd drive right out. Burn bans were in play. That was not being from down there either. Everything was dead. Normally the Florida Keys are beautiful, green, lush, all this stuff. Everything was brown and tan. It looked like you were out west because the salt water and spray had just killed all the vegetation. So everything was dead, looked like crap, debris everywhere. So they had to put up burn bans because they were really afraid of some wildfires breaking out on these islands. Getting into about when we were there, when we arrived, we were getting into kind of the early recovery phase, end of the response phase, beginning of the recovery phase when we kind of got into this. So maintaining the EOC, working on those liaison stuff. There were some hospitals. I'll get into it. There's another slide. I think it covers this, but I believe it was 3 hospitals in the Keys. One was destroyed, 2 were damaged. The one that was destroyed, they went through a process of first staffing it with an EMAC or a DMAT team, the disaster medical assistance team. So basically like the MASH unit in the parking lot. And that eventually became, they brought in the Connex boxes. And that's what you see the picture on the top right there. That's one of those modular units that they brought in. And once they brought in the modular units, the DMAT team demoed and actually went to Puerto Rico and The hospital staff that normally worked out of the building that was destroyed worked out of those Connex boxes for the next however long, year, 2 years, whatever it took to rebuild the hospital itself. Um, we were doing a lot of logistical stuff, transport. I mean, there was a million different things we were going at this point. I'll get into the National Guard thing in a little bit too, because that was pretty interesting. Yeah, here's a little bit more detail on the hospitals. Again, those Connex box thing, it was pretty interesting to see that. The debris was huge, mountains of debris. I don't know, anywhere from 10 to 25 to 30 feet on each side of US 1, all the way from Miami to Key West, like everywhere. There were contract issues with that where they had contractors that are supposed to be coming in hauling it out, and they weren't hauling enough of it out. That's another whole long story we can go into, but debris management was huge down there. So the base, when we first got, you saw those pictures, it was all nice and kind of pretty when we first got there. Uh, we had a few nice days when we first arrived, and then Florida weather kicked in, meaning it stormed and rained every day at 2 p.m. It stormed and rained every night at 2 a.m. And very quickly, that base turned into, I described it as what you're seeing as pictures there. It was like walking through the trash compactor scene in Star Wars or whatever, with all the debris stuff floating around or whatever. That's how you had to go to get to your showers or to eat. So to take a shower, you had to wade through the ankle deep mud and water, take your shower, and then come back through the ankle deep mud and water back to your tent. So I didn't mind it so much because I still had a tent to sleep in with some air conditioning, and I could take a shower, and I was good with that. But I was prior infantry in the Army, so the conditions weren't bad for me. Most of the other rest of the IMT said it was the worst living conditions they had ever had. Some other things that impressed me, the photo in the top left, that's Jeff Manning to my side, Cynthia, and then Jeff's wife. I can't remember her name. So Cynthia, the attorney I was working with, this lady was probably the most dedicated county employee I've ever met in my life anywhere. She was the situation unit leader, like I said, during the day. She was staying at the base with us. So I think it was like second or third morning, I was a little bit concerned. So at the mess hall, I go over, we're eating breakfast at the base before we go to work at the EOC, and it's like 5 in the morning. So I asked her, I'm like, hey, are you okay? She's like, yeah. I'm like, how's your house? So she's like, oh, it's fine. And I'm like, well, if your house is fine, why are you staying here? And she's like, I can get so much more done. She's like, I live 45 minutes away. So that would be an hour and a half I would waste every day. So essentially what she was doing situation unit leader stuff all day during the day. She would go back to the base and sit in her cot and do legal work for the county till about 1 or 2 in the morning, get about 3 hours sleep, get up, and then repeat that the next day. And she had been doing this since before the hurricane. And so we were at landfall plus 9, 10, 11. We were in that like 2 weeks of this, and this lady was just thriving like this. I mean, it was impressive to see a lot of the employees, their homes have been destroyed or damaged severely, and they're still there every day with you. We sometimes forget that on IMTs. We roll in, we help the local community, but, we still leave eventually. We get to go back to where we're from, and they're still there stuck dealing with it. So there was a human side of it that was pretty impressive. Some of the stuff there. That video, I couldn't get to work early. I don't know what happened to my link, but they made us do a rest period before we left, and it wasn't much of a rest period because we had almost a tropical storm roll through. But anyway, some finance numbers. We were burning about $500,000 a day. We had burned through about 20 plus million before we left. Had some successes there. Logistics, they had some successes. They were doing a lot of different stuff, tracking down things. There was not a very clear ordering process that had been used. So in other words, the state came in and ordered up a bunch of stuff without coordinating with the county. And then the county had ordered up stuff. So a lot of the Virginia team's time was spent trying to figure out what the state had ordered versus what the county had ordered. And they pretty much didn't care what the state ordered because they weren't paying for that. So they were trying to track down and really get working with finance to get exactly what their amounts were. They had some, for others in the room that are listening to this, if you've been on EMAC request, you've probably never seen this, or maybe you have, but they had a 100% reimbursement for the first 30 days. So they did not care. I mean, the checkbook was blank and it was wide open and they could spend all they wanted. Now, I did see I witnessed a lot of waste because of that down there, but usually there's like a 75-25 split. That didn't kick in until 30 days in. So at the end, anybody else that's got experience with that, that's what we had. It was kind of crazy. They were burning through money like you would not believe. Um, just a lot of the agencies we were kind of working with. Skip through that stuff. The operations section, they had a guy that was a lieutenant in the city of Richmond Police Department. So he had no expertise in this type of thing, but he did very well because essentially he was just doing what he was just using ICS. He was using ICS and his IMT principles, and he was able to do it, even though he didn't have the expertise there because the system actually works. So that was kind of some notes I did about that. This was interesting. So they had a program I'd never seen before using their National Guard. They had done it before, I know, because I spent a whole day correcting these forms by hand they had from I think it was Hurricane Wilma or something from a few years back. Because of the Third Amendment to the Constitution and Posse Comitatus Act and other things, the U.S. military cannot enter private homes, right? So they can't even ask to enter private homes. So they had this program where we took these forms and they were right of entry forms, and we took them to volunteers at the local Home Depot, Lowe's, etc. Had them at tables out front. So you, as a citizen, are walking up because your house is jacked up, right? So you come walking up, and they would say, "Hey, is your house jacked up?" And you're like, "Yep, it sure is." And they're like, "All right, if you want a National Guard squad to come in and take all the water damage stuff out of your house, they'll strip it all out. Any ruined furniture, they'll bust the drywall out." Strip it down to studs, get all the water damage crap, and they'll take it all out of your house. They will blue roof the top, the roof, so it can't get any more damage in there, and then they will treat it for mold, and then they leave. And then the second phase of this, we had gotten a $10 million grant on the spot for, was they had designated contractors that would come into your home. They would make sure the electrical was working, plumbing was working, you had a working kitchen, one bedroom drywalled and one bathroom drywalled. And then and the point was to get you living back in your house. You had a room you could sleep in, you could cook and eat in your house, you could use the bathroom, shower, all that good stuff, but you're just blue roofed, and but that gives you time to live in your house while you work out the rest of the damage with your insurance company. I hope that, if that makes sense, right? So that's what that whole program was, and it was extremely successful. This National Guard battalion rolled in, and they would send companies in these different neighborhoods, and these people that signed these forms, they would give them the form, they would go in, those dudes would destroy some stuff like you would not. I mean, just they would gut those houses in no time, drag all that stuff to the curb, treat it for mold, and on to the next one. And they would just go through whole. I mean, we reduced our shelter population by hundreds of people doing this program. It was extremely successful, really unique, never saw it before, but it worked. It was pretty cool. So we had left, was it 18th, I think, of September. So our last day working was the 2nd. Demo, tried to rest, very difficult with the way the weather was that night. But then we took 2 days driving back. Everybody's pretty exhausted after that. I think I had slept about 3 hours a night for 14 days straight. It was I was worn out. I hadn't been that worn out since I was in the military. It was pretty rough. So challenges, people not sharing information. I mean, that's pretty common anywhere. I always avoid texts for official communications. People want to text and stuff, and they want to use group text. I'm a big time against that. Not wanting it FOIA'd and other things. Try to encourage people to stick to 213s, the real forms that you need to. Vision Link app, I don't think exists anymore, but so I'm skipping ahead, I think, to the next slide, but I swear every agency that worked on that EOC, or not every one of them, most of them, sent the person they didn't want in their office to the EOC to work in that office. I mean, it was some very difficult, abrasive people in that place. And getting information out of them, especially as a situation unit, because your situation unit, you have to get information out of them, was a challenge. It was difficult trying to get it out of them. But I would have to learn how everybody's personality worked and the best way to get to them. So for the Red Cross people, they would take forever entering this information. I found out that there was an actual app where I could get the shelter numbers off the app, and I didn't even have to ask them. That helped. There was another lady that if you talk to her in person, she was like a Wolverine or something and would like want to rip your eyes out every time you talk to her. She was like crazy. I don't know. She was not a people person at all. However, when I started communicating her with email, even though I was sitting like two tables over, if I sent her an email, I would get the little like thank yous with a little smiley face emoji things behind. Like she just was not a people person. She communicated by email. So I had to go around and figure out the best way to talk to all these people or how to get information and work with all these different folks um, with their stuff. It was kind of crazy. Weather, people were kind of baffled. They didn't believe me when I put out the first couple weather reports. I'm like, all right, high is going to be 85 today, low is going to be 79. And people are like, what? They're like, nah, that can't be right. There's no way. And I'm like, it is, because the weather is completely different, because it's like being on the ocean, because you essentially are. You're an island surrounded by the water. So water is very stable. So you didn't have a lot of temperature changes. As far as the temperature up and down, of course, we did have storms and that sort of stuff that came through quite a bit, but temperature did not fluctuate. It stayed pretty much the same. This is where we'll get into, like I said, I don't want to hurt people's feelings, but there were a lot of other IMTs there. We came in, we worked with IMTs from Florida, New York, Louisiana, Colorado, quite a few. There was a bunch in that county working. And again, without pointing fingers and stuff, when we took over, there was one box of documents from the first like 9 or 10 days. And the emergency man, I was in the meeting when this came up. It was a command and general staff, and he's like, "All right, how are we with the documentation?" And somebody from one of the other teams was like, "Yeah, we've got the doc box." And he's like, "Box singular?" He's like, "It should be box plural. Like we should have probably a ream box for every day at this point." And they did not. So we had to backtrack and get a lot of documentation put together and fix that. And that was identified in that. If you, I know some of you probably read the 2017 hurricane season report on IMTs. There were some identified deficiencies where people were not qualified to be in the position, or teams weren't qualified and then deployed. So we saw some of that stuff. There were some people that did not know what they were doing. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. Let's see. We had some scammers with volunteers and that sort of stuff. I love this one. Web EOC is great until the power goes out and you have no internet. That was what they did not use Web EOC. They had it previously, and as soon as they ran into problems, everything went back to old fashioned paper, and they kind of stuck that way. The FEMA process, for those of you that are familiar, people go to shelters first. Then FEMA generally tries to move families into hotel rooms, and then they try to move you into either trailers on your own property or somehow get you back into your house. And FEMA had a policy that said you cannot use a hotel that has the word resort in the name for this program they had. Every hotel in the Keys has the word resort in the name. It doesn't mean you get a back rub or a massage. It just means they thought it was cool to put the name resort in there. So we had to get either president or director of FEMA override to be able to use those hotels. That was fun. Houseboats were another challenge. So that's a unique thing to the Keys. So you generally don't have those other place like middle of the country. You're not going to have houseboat, right? So deal with those. FEMA's disaster system works that you register a disaster with an address, a physical address, right? Problem with houseboats is there might be, and there were like 2,000, by the way. So there might be like 300 that are all registered out of this one marina. Well, what that meant was whoever the first one on this houseboat got back to that marina, got into the disaster registration center and registered their boat. All right, they were good. They were registered. The next person that tried to register, they got an error message saying, sorry, this address is already in use by somebody else. And the other 298 people or houseboat people that were registered out of the marina got the same thing. So they were having to figure out new processes and policies with FEMA to be able to, this is some of the challenges we were dealing with and negotiating through, is trying to figure out how to deal with the houseboat thing so they can get everybody registered. Let's see. This one was my favorite. So we had some individual contractors that deployed down there too. So there was one that was working at our table, and it drove me insane. Please do not go on a deployment and leave your phone with some annoying ringtone on the table and walk off and go somewhere. And the same person was like working on planning a wedding for their family member or something in the middle of this disaster. It was driving me absolutely insane. But that's like a little bit of a rant. Lots of little things to deal with. So the bottom bullet there, cash on this deployment. The hurricane made landfall on the 10th of September. We demobbed on the 3rd, officially the morning of the 3rd, or 2nd was our first day. The communication stuff was just staging to start fixing all the internet, phone, and communications issues in the Keys. Just staging. They hadn't even started yet. Everything was cash only. So I mean, everything. So businesses were starting to open back up, but yeah, and there were banks that were opening up. So the residents there could get to the bank to get some cash, but then all of their dealings were cash only because nobody could take credit cards because that whole system was still down and out a month after landfall. I'm trying to skip through some of the stuff because there's a lot of detail in here. I don't want to nail all of it. Oh, big thing. It was Groundhog Day for sure. In other words, it's the exact same and working in a room with no windows. I learned very quickly that it is annoying when people put either today or as of last night or something like that in their reporting forms because you very quickly lose track of that. You have to use dates for everything and be very very formal with that stuff. The Coast Guard was this was kind of crazy to me too. So boats became a huge issue. So there are boats everywhere. I told you they were in trees, they're everywhere. So a lot of people thought, oh, Coast Guard, it's a Coast Guard issue. No, sorry, no. Coast Guard only deals with it if it's in navigable water. They had, as of October 1st, so 20 days afterwards, they had only removed one boat. And the only reason they removed that one boat was because it was blocking the port in Key West that a cruise ship needed to come dock at. So they removed that one. All the rest of them, they had not touched. If the boat is broken up, then it's considered debris, and they don't do debris. Somebody else has to do debris. If it's on any of the coves or on the land, then that's the county because it's a county area. That was kind of crazy to me. But yeah, they said they were moving at light speed, and they had only got the one vessel out. 3 or 4 weeks into it. Kind of crazy. I hit on most of this stuff. They did a great job of communications. These message boards were up, I would say every mile through the Keys. So 121 of them or whatever it was. The first one would say the curfew information. The next one had the boil water notice. So they were constantly putting out information on that, radio, everything else. Electrical work was going pretty fast. You found cars abandoned all over the place too, because people would have multiple cars and they would leave one behind, but they put it on high ground. Fuel. That's the photo of the fuel points. The way it looked, you just drive in. They'd stick a hose inside of your car, fuel you, and you drive out. Looting. They had this one sign on the right. You can see pretty, the loot we shoot thing. But there was another one on the left there. It's kind of hard to read, but it read, "You loot, we kill you. This is not Texas." They were pretty serious about that down there. They did have a curfew. There were no documented cases of actual looting in the Keys. They had looting calls, but every time the sheriff's office would respond, it would end up being either the actual homeowner or business owner that had returned and was going through their stuff, and it was not an actual looting. So they had no issues. But again, they had the advantage of the one way in, one way out on US 1. So they had the advantage there. Go through some of the damage photos to give you an idea. Some of these I took. Some of these some other members of the Florida team that were in SIT had went out and done. We had different days we were going in the field to kind of get a feel for some of the damage in the different areas. But you can see some of that heavy rebar and concrete damage, and there's some of these large buildings, vehicles and boats everywhere. These are pretty heavy damaged areas there. You can see they've already got a blue roof on that one. That one's completely off foundation. That is a camping trailer that is turned inside out. There was a whole trailer park there. Those things were tossed around like they were toys. That one's just folded inside out. The roof's on the left part of the side there, and then you're looking at the wall in the middle there, and kind of the base to the left. Another home completely destroyed. That's another picture of that trailer park, the trailers all over the place. That's how every gas station looked. So until they could get those big awnings fixed, so the gas stations could open, they had to run fuel points because all of them looked like that pretty much. So these two, so this brings up an interesting point. You got these two houses side by side. They were on the same side facing the Atlantic Ocean, so they got the brunt of the storm. But one house is almost intact, the other one is completely destroyed. I usually ask people why to kind of do the whole question and answer thing, but the short version of this is basically building codes. You would see this a lot in these neighborhoods, side by side structures where one was destroyed, one was there, and it's based on when the structure was built. Structures that were built more recently to the more stringent codes held up to the impacts better than the older homes. And that's another picture of the same two side by side. That's a sign. They had already recycled it once for like made a reduced speed ahead in some parking sign, but the sandblasting from the wind and the sand just ripped all the signs apart. So a lot of your signs, you didn't have any information. That's just a photo of that blended team that I went with. Again, by the end of it, we were a true team, and it worked out pretty well. There's me down at the buoy, and you can see the left side of the buoy is completely sandblasted down to the concrete. That's the side that the hurricane hit. So you can see where the wording kind of cuts off right there, and to the left of that and that other side is just pure concrete, no paint whatsoever all left on it, and the right side still had some on the back side of it. Of course, I was still suffering from Bell's palsy after that during that mission, so my face is still paralyzed on the right side. Never has completely recovered, but that was another thing that was kind of miserable on that particular deployment because I was still face paralyzed and having to blink my eye with my finger and all that stuff every once in a while was not fun. That's it. I tried to run through that quick. There was a whole lot of information. I know we're getting late. Does anybody have any questions or anything though?
Chris, what an incredible presentation. Holy cow. Oh, looks like Mike's got his hand up there.
Yeah, quickly, Chris, thank you so much. This was really cool. I'm just curious, in New Jersey, one of the things that we do is that real good integration of the state emergency management officials. Obviously, it's the New Jersey State Police, but they embed somebody from their unit into each county's EOC. Was there something like that? I know you mentioned Web EOC was in and out and blah, 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 but did you have that sort of direct connection that could help you with the state?
Yes and no. The way they worked it down there, and I'll explain the way they worked it down there. Well, first of all, Florida, Irma continued on and destroyed a lot of other counties up through the main part of Florida. So there were a whole lot of counties affected. So they don't have enough EM officials to get to all those counties. So the way they do it is they activate part of their National Guard, and they had two National Guard guys sitting over at a desk, and they were the quote unquote EM liaison to the state. And really, I'm not trying to be, these are National Guard. I don't know what their MOS regular is or what they do. They basically were just told, hey, you're the contact. But all they really served was for me to take them a sit rep every day and feed them a sit rep. And I never really got anything back from them. It was just they were the point of contact is essentially what they were. And that's the way they worked at because they just didn't have enough state EM officials to get around every county.
Cool. Thanks.
Yep.
Cool. No, holy cow, Chris. It brings back memories. I was at Harvey for that side of the deal, and the other gal that works right down the hall was Irma Maria down on the islands. And you nailed it. That's what happened.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and I left that part out in the overall text at the beginning. The situation overview is Harvey had hit, so Texas was blasted by Harvey. Irma hit right after that, and then you had Marie go right back behind that up on Puerto Rico. So the FEMA officials, expanding on what Mike was asking about, like the state stuff, we did have FEMA officials down there, and they were wore out even by the time they got to Irma and they still had Marie to deal with after that. And I remember in one meeting, the lady from FEMA, she was like, "Oh man, we're kind of tapped out" or something like that. And I thought the EM was going to come across the table at her, and he's like, I don't want to hear it, you know. And I mean, because he was a very abrasive guy, and it was crazy. But everybody was wore out. Those DMAT folks were leaving straight from where we were and going straight to Puerto Rico, and they had already been working for. I don't know if they may have done Harvey too. I mean, you're talking like they're on like their third or fourth week, and they're going to Puerto Rico to work even more.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, Chris, because I know in up here in Region 2 for New Jersey, New York, we also cover Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico for the FEMA perspective. So that's the advantage, is that you don't end up taxing the FEMA team that's going to Florida switch over. But on the flip side, a back-to-back storm is no fun for anybody. And I was involved on the Maria side the week between the two storms, and we had already evacuated dialysis patients to Florida. So here you are now mixing a bit of region to region on the FEMA side of who's where and accountability and all that good fun stuff. Now that was on the other side of the coast. I think they went to Miami predominantly, but then everybody had to evacuate from FEMA back to Florida, actually to Georgia, temporarily while the storm hit, and then come back again. So yeah, and I think New Jersey sent their team to Puerto Rico. I know they sent a law enforcement team. Bucky, you probably know this better than me. And so I'm pretty sure that Puerto Rico got a good blend of other folks, but I'm surprised to hear some EMAC teams and some others going from one to the other. That has got to be taxing.
Yeah, we did send I believe it was 3 deployments total and about 10 vehicles to Puerto Rico on the law enforcement side, and then a planner and a couple other people. We also had 3 deployments for those same 2 storms to St. Thomas and St. John. So, we had medical personnel. The first deployment also received a 50-pack of state troopers that were our security, because there was so many reports, just like you had experienced with the looting and there's just so many reports of that, and got down there and found none of it. They did find a brick of cocaine, in the middle of the street that had floated by, I guess, at some point. But, other than that, spot on with all the things that you experienced is the same way. Just the difference is in the islands. And we're used to this because of Region 2. In the islands, they have a completely different mindset when it comes to the workday. The workday starts later, takes a large break, and then ends early. So, it's different trying to get, you're used to a 12-hour work cycle and you get maybe 6 hours of work cycle. So, but.
Okay. Chris, thank you so much for hopping on. This was great. Looking forward to getting this one recorded and shared out with the members. I think there's a lot of takeaways in here. So thanks for presenting. Any other good of the orders before we wrap it up?
Spencer, I'll send you a PDF of those slides. You can put that on the thing too. No big
Outstanding. Deal. Yeah, heck yeah. That'd be perfect. Okay. Cool. Well, we'll see you guys in August. The 20 or whatever it is, the same day. Then I'll maybe send out just a quick Google survey or something, seeing if we adjust the time an hour up or down or sideways or something, to see if that would get a few more folks to be able to hop on. And again, if you got other ideas on how we access more members, let me know. Thanks so much. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you, Spencer. Take care.